Ura je 7 minut čez, mislim, da bo kar čas, da začnemo. Tisti, ki me slučajno ne poznate, moje ime je Marko Zajec z Inštituta za novejšo zgodovino, večina me povedal. In kot predstavniku sodelujoče inštitucije, Inštituta za novejšo zgodovino, mi je veliko veselje in tudi čast seveda, da lahko na kratko, zelo bi bil kratek, predstavim oba gosta današnjega dogodka. Gosta, ki bosta predstavila ERC projekt z naslovom Neteritorialna avtonomija kot oblika zaščite manjšin. Mislim, da natančno idejo mogoče ni, imam drug, naslovi se malo razlikujejo. Tukaj imam ter potujoča ideja. Vprašanje ideja potujočosti je definitivno navzoča tudi v njihovem logu. Približala nam bosta to bistvo projekta ne samo preko opisa projekta, ampak tudi preko primera uporabe načela strani sudetsko-nemške stranke po prvi svetovni vojni, tako da bomo videli tudi predstavitev neke študije primera. Samo z eno besedo, prej sem vodji tega projekta rekel, da mi je zelo všeč, da so mi všeč projekti, ki lahko človek pove z enim stavkom. In to je ta stavek. Omenjeni ERC projekt se posveča konceptu neteritorialne avtonomije kot modelu upravljanja z večnarodnostjo znotraj držav. Jaz mislim, da je to tista stvar, ki je osnovna, je pa stvar veliko bolj zapletena kot ta stavek. Če gremo kar k našim gostom, Börries Kuzmany, oziroma najbolj v avstrijsko Kuzmany, je zgodovinar in slavist, študiral je ruščino, docent na Inštitutu za vzhodnoevropsko zgodovino Univerze na Dunaju, ukvarja se zgodovino srednje in vzhodne Evrope od sredine 18. do sredine 20. stoletja. Pri tem se posveča problemom nacionalizma, zgodovine mest, obmejnih prostorov in tudi judovske zgodovine. Od leta 2018, mislim, da leto pa pol zdaj to traja, je vodja ERC projekta Non-Territorial Autonomy as Minority Protection in Europe, oziroma Intellectual Political Historical Idea. Kot zgodovinar, seveda, je imel mnoge štipendije, nagrade, objavljal je veliko člankov, ampak jaz bi tukaj na kratko izpostavil, kot zgodovinar, ki se ukvarja sam z mejami, moram nujno izpostaviti v bistvu njegovo dodelano doktorsko nalogo, monografijo o galicijskem obmejnem mestu Brodi v dolgem 19. stoletju. Knjiga je bila tudi prevedena v angleščino in v zadnjem času tudi v ukrajinščino. Dobila je več nagrad, recimo nagrado Richarda Plaške, nagrado Fritza Epsteina in še nekaj drugih. Je pa izvrstna kombinacija ekonomske zgodovine, mejnih študij, zgodovini judovstva in tudi zgodovine konceptov in idej, skratka izredno kompleksna, a vendarle berljiva študija, za katero bi bilo lepo, če bi jo imeli tudi v slovenščini. To je samo moja ideja zdaj. Upam, da bo meso postala. Oskar Mulej pa je Slovenec, zgodovinar in podoktorski raziskovalec na Inštitutu za vzhodnoevropsko zgodovino Univerze na Dunaju, član raziskovalne skupine, ki jo vodi naš prejšnji gost, skratka član tega ERC projekta. Raziskuje politično in idejno zgodovino Srednje Evrope v prvi polovici 20. stoletja s poudarkom na vprašanjih povezanih z liberalizmom in narodnimi gibanji. Leta 2018 pa je na Srednjeevropski univerzi v Budimpešti doktoriral na temo liberalizma, slovenski, avstrijski in češki strankarski politiki med obema vojnama. Oskar Mulej je seveda s svojimi objavami svoj prostor ustvaril si tudi v slovenskem zgodovinopisju. Recimo naj izpostavim njegov članek z naslovom Gospodarski in družbeni nazori v slovenskem naprednem taboru 1930-35, ki je bil objavljen v naši inštitutski reviji Prispevki za novejšo zgodovino in je po mojem mnenju en izmed temeljnih člankov, če ne celo temeljni članek o tej problematiki. Gre pa seveda za zanimivo zgodbo o tem, kako so se slovenski liberalni gospodarstveniki in politiki, soočali z veliko gospodarsko krizo in kako so njihovi nazori se prilagajali spremenjeni politično-ekonomski paradigmi, ki pa je narekovala večjo vlogo države. Tako mislim, da je redosled taki, da bo najprej vodja projekta predstavil svoj projekt in potem bo kolega Oskar Mulej še predstavil ta poseben, ali se mogoče motim, poseben študij, tako je. Tako, jaz si zdaj drznem prepustiti prostor našim gostom.
Hvala za vodilo do Ljubljane. I will speak in English. My Slovene is not existent. I might understand some of your this very nice introduction, but I'm happy to present this more or less recently started ERC project to you. And so, what is the overarching objective of this project is to provide a new understanding of how the protection of minorities was thought and implemented in the era of nationalism. And if we look at the time since the mid-19th century, we have seen three different approaches how to deal with national diversity in a state. First, national rights can be organized around the individual and equal citizens. This means that the individual citizen can claim specific rights towards the state, like addressing the state in his or her native language. Then a second option would be to grant national rights to autonomous territorial units, where a national minority can be in a majority position. But actually this just reverses this majority-minority problems on a different layer of state organization, and it does not really provide an answer in heavily intermingled regions. And then we have seen a third approach to how minority rights could be perceived, and this was to grant rights to collective bodies. And these collective bodies would unite persons of a common ethno-national affiliation wherever they might live in the country. So this means that the legal entity is neither the individual nor the territory, but the national group per se. So it's a group rights approach. Because these collective bodies would manage the cultural affairs of their group autonomously, such as, for instance, their schools, their theaters, their clubs. And as this third approach is based on a person's belonging to a national group and not on a person's belonging to a specific place of residence in the country, this approach has been labeled non-territorial autonomy. And our project will now explore this non-territorial autonomy as a political idea and as an applied policy across Europe from the late 19th century until the end of the interwar period. And we want to understand how this idea circulated synchronically, so in time, and how this idea meandered diachronically through the 20th century. So exchange in the same time and how this idea was transferred and translated. So the first objective is first to trace the origins of this idea. And the origins are to be found in the Habsburg monarchy in the wake of the revolution of 1848. This was a time when different actors started a decades-long reflection on how to reorganize the Habsburg monarchy in order to grant equal rights to all nationalities. And actually many agreed that this could not be achieved by reorganizing the Habsburg Empire on a territorial principle, but according to a personal, non-territorial principle. And these proponents and also critics of non-territorial autonomy included very different people from very different political backgrounds. We have liberal legal scholars and policymakers, we have left-wing theorists, and they exchanged their opinions in the Habsburg, I term the Habsburg Laboratory of Nationality Policy. And you see here on the slide, you only see a tiny number of people who thought and considered it. Most important for this idea, and you will find them on the next slide, for the concept, the most important for the conceptualization of non-territorial autonomy as an idea were the Austro-Marxist thinkers Edwin Christian, Karl Renner, and Otto Bauer. And what was the main idea of these social democrats? Basically, what they proposed was to split the state from the nation. And this is exactly the opposite of what was fashionable at the time. At the time, everybody was talking about the nation state, and they basically suggested the opposite. They suggested two levels of state organization. So one general, one supranational parliament, where all citizens would elect deputies to, and which would negotiate and discuss general state affairs like infrastructure, military, foreign policy. And then there would be a second, or in parallel, each national group of the Habsburg Empire should constitute itself as a legal entity with autonomous organs. And these autonomous organs would then decide on their cultural affairs autonomously. And these autonomous bodies would be elected on the basis of national registers or national cadastres. So how to conceive it? So besides the central parliament, you would have 9 to 12 national councils. So one for Slovenes, one for Germans, one for Poles, Ukrainians, and so on. And then it would not matter where, for instance, you were a Slovene in Ljubljana or in Zilovec or a Slovene labor migrant in Graz. You would always be on a Slovene voting list and could only vote for Slovene deputies who then would come together in the Slovene Diet and would discuss and decide Slovenian national affairs. And of course, this idea or this concept was never realized in the Habsburg Empire. However, several Austrian provinces passed, after 1900, they passed new provincial constitutions that comprised elements of non-territorial autonomy. And of course, not fully fledged systems, rather non-territorial arrangements, but they are in a relation to it. And this idea is actually also in a way discussed in Tyrol and in Istria, but in their provincial constitutions it does not show up in this idea. So the second larger objective of this project would be to look how non-territorial autonomy was discussed during the interwar period in all these many East Central European nation states, which of course in fact were multinational states, but did not conceive of themselves as this. And we use, in our project, we use the metaphor of a traveling idea because this concept of non-territorial autonomy was not transferred from place A to place B directly. Something happened with this idea on its route, and this route was very often very serpentine ways, and so the second objective is to understand why and how this idea was translated, culturally translated, in different countries and across the ideological spectrum. So what we claim is that non-territorial autonomy per se, so the idea per se is lacking a political color, and it's rather a container that could be filled from the far left to the far right. And of course, how then the idea would look like or was proposed was very different, but the basic ingredients were always the same. And according to this, in order to prove that our project is organized in 4 work packages, so the first objective on the Habsburg Empire, this is divided into 2 work packages, one on Cisleithania and one on Transleithania. So I'm working on the Austrian part, and my colleague Anna Adriani is working on the Hungarian part. And now for this second object, for this ideological stratum, we have 4 work packages, and in the first one we investigate how and to what extent the concept of non-territorial autonomy was translated to revolutionary Russia. While the entire Russian left, so Mensheviks, social revolutionaries and the Jewish Bondists very actively encouraged the idea of non-territorial autonomy, the Bolsheviks severely criticized the Austro-Marxist model as a form of bourgeois nationalism, and Stalin dedicated a whole chapter on how bad the idea of the Austro-Marxists is. However, this is what we want to show, or what we want to prove, is that in the early early Soviet Union experimented also with territorial autonomy. In particular, if we look on the way how the Commissariat for Nationalities Affairs was structured, it was structured not by duties but by nationalities. So you had a sub-commissariat for Jews, for Tatars, for Latvians, and so on. And also, if you look on the internal organization of the Bolshevik Party, we see national sections that were obliged to make propaganda explicitly towards their national group, also organized on a non-territorial approach. Because when we think about the Soviet Union, we of course always think about this SSSR and ISSR and avtonomní okrugy and so on. So, but this is later. This is not from the very beginning. And actually, I brought you. This is the critique. How bad. So it's thoroughly bourgeois and thoroughly false. What Lenin thought about this idea, and they knew this very well. What happened in the Habsburg Empire, because Lenin was there. Stalin was in Vienna studying the Austrian case. So, but let me get to move in the political spectrum to a social democrat adaptation in the Ukrainian People's Republic. In 1917, 1918, 1919, the Ukrainian People's Republic was not a very long-lasting state, but it was actually the first state that ever legally introduced non-territorial autonomy as a law. And this law should provided for autonomous non-territorial bodies for Russians, Poles, and Jews. And the Ukrainian People's Republic was a left-leaning social democrat endeavor. And for this, it was quite easy for them to say, well, this idea has been discussed in Austro-Marxist social democrat circles before, and many of them were not only acquainted with the writings of the Austro-Marxists, but also were quite well informed what had happened in the Habsburg Empire on the provincial levels, in particular in Galicia and Bukovina, with a sizable Ukrainian population, where we have these non-territorial arrangements in the provincial constitutions. Then our colleague Timo Aber will work on the implementation in the Baltic states by liberal activists and politicians. And this is slightly later than in Ukraine, but maybe the most well-known examples of non-territorial autonomy. In general, the Baltic states had the most liberal approach to minority policies, and the most minority-friendly legislation was implemented in Estonia in 1925. There was a law on cultural autonomy. Actually, this law was modeled modeled after the needs of the German minority, but it was also meant for the Jewish and the Russian and the Swedish minority in the country. And our aim is to analyze how minority and majority politicians in the Baltic states developed their version of non-territorial autonomy models, and how they were involved in transnational discussions about this idea. I will get to these transnational, international organizations slightly later, where Baltic activists were very important. And then to move further on to the last part of the ideological spectrum, to the radical right, we want to look at how non-territorial autonomy was instrumentalized by the Sudeten-German party in Czechoslovakia, and Oscar will tell you more about this in 10 minutes. And just to show you where in this project it is, what we want to investigate is how these far right adaptations worked, and Oscar focuses mainly on an ethno-federalist model that the party developed in the mid of the 1930s, and so we want to explore how these political activists transformed the concept of non-territorial autonomy into a tool or into the language of the radical right. So again, a cultural translation of this idea. And then the third huge or larger objective of our research project is the international arena of European minority protection throughout the 20th century. And there we have a new colleague who just started, Marina Germanet. She started on Monday, so her results are not here yet, but she has been working on this topic almost for a lifetime. And for this work package, we see two relevant actors. So on the one hand, we see transnational non-governmental organizations that have been rather supportive of this idea. And on the other hand, we have international law-making institutions who have been more skeptical. So, for instance, the Congress of European Nationalities, which was a pan-European lobby for minority representatives, and they very strongly advocated this idea. And in this Congress of European Nationalities, actually, for instance, very many Baltic activists were involved. On the other hand, on the other side, the League of Nations was very hesitant to, because for the League of Nations, the ideal organization of Europe would be based on the nation state, whereas for the Congress of European Nationalities, the ideal organization of Europe would be based on nationalities. And so this is why they had difficulties in talking with each other on how to protect national diversity. And after the Second World War, collective minority rights were rather discredited, and international law-making organizations put their emphasis on individual human rights. However, national minority issues have never fully disappeared and have particularly reappeared in worldwide discussions after 1989. So this is a very large overview. So to sum up, what do we want to do? We want to write a transnational history of non-territorial autonomy as the important third approach, but understudied approach to European minority protection over the last 150 years. And I think by looking on non-territorial autonomy, we will also understand in a better way how individual or territorial approaches were managed in this period. Then we want to analyze non-territorial autonomy as a political idea and as an applied policy, and we claim that this concept has been debated or even implemented in larger parts of Europe than we have thought so far. And we argue, that's another very important claim that we make, that non-territorial autonomy as an idea was flexible enough to adapt and to translate to diverse and even antagonistic ideological conditions. And last but not least, although our project, of course, it's a historical project, it has no normative intention, it, of course, resonates with current discussions on how to deal with national diversity and minority rights in our contemporary world. So thank you for your attention, and Oscar will tell you more on his specific work project now. Thank you.
Mislim, da je sedaj prišel čas za vprašanja. Vprašanja, ki jih bo nedvomno ogromno in bodo zanimiva, lahko postavljate enemu gostu v angleščini, tudi v nemščini.
It's actually for Oscar, but ask in English so Börries can understand me, because it has wider implications. I mean, it's just a thought, basically. Don't you think that this illiberal turn is somewhat bound to happen? Because even if you look at the Moravian Compromise, I mean, basically you have the right to choose, but increasingly this right is limited. There are courts get involved in the final instance, so and they're determining your nationality based on some supposedly objective criteria. So what I mean by liberal, the thing that interests me is it possible not to go into this direction where individual rights, where individual choice basically is limited, not necessarily severely limited, but doesn't it always have to be?
Thank you, Roch. I think it's better that we have the discussion in English. So
You can do it in Slovene. I might grasp.
no, but it's
The
better.
main ideas.
Otherwise, I mean,
If it's something special, like the question for both, it's better in English. I think.
yeah, I also think so. So I find your remark very correct. It's definitely the development of nationality politics. If we look at them from a strict individualist, liberal kind of logic during the late Austrian period, it definitely, one could say, went into collectivist and less in collectivist direction and leading towards less choice. But here I must say that by using the term illiberal, I'm not talking about liberalism in strict sense. By using this term, because I mean, Renner and Bauer, they were also not liberals. They were Marxists, and large part of the theoreticians of non-territorial autonomy were not liberals, of course. But nevertheless, even the Austro-Marxist concepts were designed to be implemented within the framework of a liberal state, which late Austria-Hungary, or at least its Austrian part, arguably was. Whereas the illiberal turn about which I'm talking is of course connected to the general trend of the interwar period, which was distinctive, of course, not only for the Germans but for wider Europe, which went directly against the basic tenets of the liberal state. And the Sudeten-German proposals, for instance, are already very much on the border. They were still ostensibly designed to be implemented in Czechoslovakia, but their content was already beyond what would be in line with its constitution. And as said, the culmination point can be seen then in the Nazi conceptions.
Can I add a sentence to this? I totally agree with what you said, but I think what you should also take into account is the difference whether it was implemented or whether it was a theory. So as a theory, of course, we have this liberal trend. But in Estonia, it stays individual. And it's not because Estonia in the 30s also turned towards the right. So it's not because Estonia, also it was a liberal democracy. It was not that Estonia was so liberal and this is why it stayed liberal. But it was because the Estonian state didn't want it to be too collective for the minorities, because this would empower the minorities too much in this illiberal way. So I think if these Volksschutzgesetze would have been a real option in the Czechoslovak state, they might have been tamed as well and liberalized again. So I think it makes a difference whether it's an implemented autonomy praxis in a more or less liberal state democracy, or whether it's fantasies.
Question? And maybe I have another question at the end of your presentation. It was the project. It was stated that the prospects of this idea for the future, for the present, and it was of course clearly stated that it's not a normative way of thinking. But still, I'm still thinking, how could any of this, without thinking normatively, be applied today, and what would be the consequences? Where would it be applied? Don't we have it anyway? And maybe that's a question for Oscar. This in Slovenian, actually reminded me that the Slovenian version of minority rights for the Hungarian and Italian minority includes national catastrophe, includes those ideas that are not bound to certain space. Although I'm not an expert on it, because it's usually limited to certain territory. What is this? It's not an easy topic, and it's not an easy to say. Okay, we have it's a possibility, bad or good, for the policy implementation, or at least theory. But what could be this useful for today? It's very plain, plain sentence, not being normative, and say that this is the way to solve all the national problems of today. Is it relevant? Maybe.
I think Oscar and I have different opinions on that.
Oh, that's great. I've bumped into a different stories.
Not radically different, but still. There is a European non-territorial autonomy network. There's actually a Slovenian guy in there, I forgot his name, he's a political scientist. And he explained to me the Slovenian system for the Prekmurje region and the Adriatic cities. And although it's territorially limited, it's non-territorially organized. So the non-territorial autonomy is limited to a specific region, but it's according to the personality principle. It's a little bit the same thing with South Tyrol. It's a provincial territorial autonomy, but how the national proportionality within the South Tyrolean government is based on the personal principle. And if you look to Vojvodina, you also have, of course, Vojvodina in its entirety has a territorial status, a specific territorial status. But how you have the Ruthenians, the Croats, and all these groups within Vojvodina to organize themselves, it is based on a non-territorial idea. And in very, very little elements, you have it in the Bosnia-Croat Federation. So not in Bosnia in general, but in the Bosnia-Croat Federation. Although there it's also based on territorial things. The very important question is, and there is no answer to it from my point of view, is how you define who belongs to the group and who is allowed to speak for the group. And both is relevant, because first of all, who belongs to the group is it only those people who enlist themselves? Then you might have the problem with there was a nice case in Hungary in the 1990s, because Hungary has a non-territorial autonomy law. There was I've forgotten which group. I think the Armenian group. It was hijacked. It was hijacked by Hungarians because they said, well, we are Armenians because it's about sources. Then they get money for Armenian schools, but you can also use them slightly different. So it's about power. So can then there be a body that says, no, you are not part of our group? And who has the right to say this? And this actually takes us back to the Moravian Compromise, where exactly this was the problem. Because the rule was pupils are allowed to attend only those schools. Sorry, I can't watch you. Pupils are only allowed to attend those schools which language of instruction they understand. Mm-hmm. And this led, not in the very beginning, but during the last years of the Habsburg Empire, it led to the fact that there was a committee where the little 5-year, 6-year-old boy or girl was sitting in front of the committee of elderly men, and they were shouting at them and asking, "Do you understand me?" And I mean, that's very violent. But why was it introduced? Because both national sides made claims to their children, and on the other hand, they were obsessed with the fear that there might be Trojan horses. Like in the Hungarian case, that their group could be hijacked by the others. And there is no solution, because it would be totally illiberal if there was a board to say, no, you are not part of our group, because then it would also lead to the fact that always the most radical say, oh no, okay, you speak Slovene, but you're not a fervent Slovene nationalist, you're not part of the Slovene national group. So, I mean, that's, let's take the example of Corinthia. What are the Windische? Who has the right to say that they are Slovenes? Who has the right to say that they are not Slovenes? Of course, as a minority-friendly Austrian, I would say the Windische are Slovenes, but I mean, I don't have the right to do that. And this brings us at the very core of the problematic functions of non-territorial autonomy. But on the other way, it is a good thing not to create, draw new territorial lines and new territorial provinces that might ask for separation from the state sooner or later. So it's ambivalent, and I think we have, if we consider, I think it's very important in minority issues to consider this idea, and then to say, okay, what do we buy higher? Is it appeasement? Is pacification necessary? Then let's do it on the expenses of liberal rights, or shall we go for the general state approach with individual rights only? But some individual rights can only be exercised as group rights. I mean, if you want to have a minority language school, who decides what you learn there? It's not an individual right. Like your individual right to free exercise of religion. I mean, if you don't have churches, you can't have free exercise of religion. So many individual rights are bound to group rights. And you need, if you want to introduce it, you need a discussion in the society on how to proceed. And I think that's the most important.
And it also shows how the relevant this research of this idea is, because basically it sounds not so it always is complicated. But it sounds something that you could easily understand. Non-territorial autonomy has got certain bodies. Your first diagrams and maps show so nicely, and that's the logic. But when you go further, it really needs the base. It really needs some profound research. And Oscar, what are you to say about it, and like specify if you have any difference?
Well, I would just say that by saying that our project is not normative, we want to say that we do not wish to promote non-territorial autonomy or speak against it. What we, however, do want is that to provide, to research it historically, and yes, to perhaps provide useful material for those theoreticians and decision makers that are engaged in contemporary debates about the concept. Because I personally also believe that sometimes taking into account the historical perspective would be very good in this sphere.
I can only agree. Please, by now I suppose you have thought about the question.
Yeah. I have a question about putting this idea, which obviously varies a lot through time and through places, on this political spectrum from left to right. Have you got maybe an alternative to that? Were you thinking about, do you have an opinion? Do you have any problems with putting this? Because the idea of left and right is very linear, right? So I was just wondering, maybe you have some alternatives.
Oscar, you can now criticize my approach.
No, this is, I mean, this is one. In order to show the multi-dimensional nature of our project, I think that in very plastic terms, I think that this this left-right spectrum is useful. It's useful to show how political currents, political parties, ideologies that were on different sides in terms of also being practically hostile to each other and are usually bound to this left-right perspective, which I agree very much is extremely limited and it has limited analytical value, but nevertheless, I think that in this particular case, where we speak of Bolshevik, social democrat, liberal, perhaps also conservative, about which we didn't speak, and then far right, I think that it is pretty much useful to orientate and present our thing. Whereas at the same time, I already, by introducing this liberal, illiberal dichotomy, I am partly taking a different take on it. It's because I'm focusing on, I'm looking from a different perspective, and I'm focusing on a different, on different aspects of the problem. So it's possible to look at it, of course, from various angles, and it's, I agree very much with the remark.
Yeah, I have a comment, and I have two questions for Oskar. I totally agree with what Boris was saying about why it's still important today, especially about the hijacking. Especially Croats in Bosnia are always pissed the last two elections because their representative in the presidency was voted with the votes of the Bosniaks, you know, so those that would be more favorable towards them. And the other thing is also that I know that there are some people in Belgrade working on non-territorial plan for Kosovo, so that can be used for Serbs in Kosovo as well. So, you know, they are rediscovering in a way what ultra-Marxists were writing. And I have two questions for Oskar. First one is connected to the, I'm not sure if I remember correctly, the Kameradschaft-Bund or something like that. Would you label them as anti-modernist? You know, looking back in Middle Ages, and it's quite similar to some other cases that we know. And the second question would be, you mentioned lawyers or legal scholars that play a very important role, and this is connected also to my topic on the national Yugoslavism under socialism, where lawyers had big debates on Yugoslavism, but they were hidden from public. They were inside of an lawyers association. So I was wondering if some such similar association existed in Czechoslovakia, or if you know, if they also had the debates, maybe not only between Germans, but if there was a clash of ideas. Maybe.
Tomasz, you have any
No,
remarks? Okay.
it was a comment.
So thank you, Tomasz. First of all, yes, certainly. I mean, it's a very general term, but anti-modernism also a problematic one. But yes, I do believe that Kameradschaft-Bund, they definitely can be put under they were big critics of what we may call as modernity, and they were ultra conservative, very much backward looking into also partly mythical past. And the second question, the legal scholars. Well, here it was slightly different in this case. This was quite a public thing. I mean, this not that it would be something that would be read on the pages of the yellow press or discussed in wide circles, but nevertheless, these people did want to popularize their ideas, at least among the educated public, and especially within politics. And most importantly, on the level of international minority movement. So European Nationalities Congress and its main mouthpiece, Nation und Stadt, that was also the main mouthpiece of where these were the mentioned legal scholars, especially Raschhofer, often wrote. And at the same time, the Sudeten German activists were writing there, including some of the lawyers some of them being lawyers and at the same time the proposers of the actual bills. So Ernst Kunt, for example, who wasn't a big theoretician, but nevertheless was engaging in questions of what he called Volkstumsrecht, and he was writing there. And within Czechoslovakia, again, at least when this thing became public, when these legal proposals were put forward, afterwards there was a huge polemic, and from the Czechoslovak side there was Emil Sobota, who was like the official Czechoslovak nationality lawyer, and he highly criticized it and engaged in fierce debates with the other side. And at the same time, also earlier you had many publications that were disseminated broadly, talking about questions of especially German autonomy from the one side, and on the other side about nationality law and the language question in Czechoslovakia from the Czech side. And lastly, the Sudetendeutsche, there was also the Sudetendeutsche Juristenverein. Excuse me if I maybe I said it wrongly, but something along these terms. And they organized events where they again invited their colleagues from outside Czechoslovakia, so from the German Reich and from other German groups and from the European Nationalities Congress, and there these things were discussed. So it was quite
Thank you. Do you have any other question?
I have a question for Oscar regarding this 1937 law. You briefly mentioned organizations of corporate nature that were kind of compulsory ones. Could you elaborate a bit about this? What would be their function? How would they impose
well,
right nationality to every individual citizen?
I cannot say much about this because it was all theoretical and all very vague. What I can say is that the legal bills themselves stated that for all Lebensbereiche, so all spheres of life, there should be compulsory organizations which would regulate where these things would be decided. They should be founded, or at the same time organizations that already existed, and here I have in mind the existing national defense organizations should be reorganized under a unified leadership and reorganized on a corporatist basis. Again, corporatism, we know it was a big thing. It was a big slogan in the era in various political camps, whereby most of them did not. There was little meat in the end, so to say. And however, if we look at Kameradschaftsbund, they belong to those popularizers of ständische Idee, of state idea, that had some thoughts about it, so to say, at least. But this did not reflect anymore in the the legal proposals themselves were dry and very theoretic. So we can just speculate how this would look in practice.
If there is no other questions, I think it's time to say thank you to our guests. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for coming. Thank you for this lecture. Thank you for the talk. Thank you for the answers. And thank you for being here. And hopefully we will have similar cooperation in the future.